The body of a young waitress is found in the mountains of Colorado. With no physical link to the killer, the only hope of catching him is to decode his darkest secrets. To solve the murder, investigators must decipher a message written in blood. A young mother is the victim of an apparent suicide. Or is it a well-staged murder? To prove foul play, detectives will have to build a solid case from a flimsy square of plastic. The path from victim to killer is rarely clear. But with forensics as a guide, today's detectives can find the path to justice along the faintest trails of evidence. Rugged and isolated, the mountains of Colorado Springs, Colorado are a hiker's paradise. But those same qualities make it the perfect place to hide a body. On June 29, 1997, the El Paso County Sheriff's Department was called to a shallow grave. They unearthed the body of a young woman, but were unable to dig up any clues leading to her killer. Detectives could only speculate as to when their Jane Doe had been discarded and by whom. Detective Michelle Hodges knew she had little to work with.
The evidence that we had was very limited. We didn't know where she was killed at, and that normally is where the majority of your evidence is going to be found, and that very much hampered our investigation.
But they were able to give their Jane Doe a name. At autopsy, the body was positively identified as Deidre Malachowski, a 24-year-old waitress from the nearby town of Fountain. She had been reported missing a week before. The victim had been killed by repeated blows to the head with a blunt instrument. Biological evidence found during an internal examination of the victim suggested that she'd been raped. For now, it was the only physical evidence connecting Deidre to her killer. The body had been exposed to the elements and contained fly larvae. Investigators hoped that these insects would help pinpoint the time of death. At the Arapahoe County Crime Lab, detectives turned to Thomas Adair, an expert in forensic entomology.
Forensic entomology is the use of insects to answer a medical criminal question. Oftentimes this involves trying to determine how long a body has been exposed, how long it's been since females have laid eggs or larvae on the body.
In murder cases where a body has been dumped outdoors, adult female flies usually locate the remains within minutes and begin depositing eggs. These eggs help experts calculate how long the body has been exposed. At the crime scene, larval flies had been removed from the victim's remains and preserved in alcohol. At autopsy, a second sample of insects was removed and kept alive. These two sets of larvae were sent to the crime lab for analysis. One set would be used to identify the species that had colonized the body. The other would tell experts how long the victim had been dead. The first step was to rear the live flies to maturity.
In the rearing process, what we do is we take those immature species, the maggots, we place them in a jar with a food source, like in this case beef liver or chicken liver, and then allow them to progress to their adult stage. Once they've emerged, it allows us a little bit more ease in identification.
Once the species was identified, Adair was able to pinpoint the exact age of the preserved larvae found on the body. He determined that the larvae were at least a week old. Since Deidre Malachowski was last seen a week earlier, he deduced the victim had been killed within 24 hours of her disappearance. Now that she had a timeline to follow, Detective Hodges began questioning witnesses, starting with the person closest to the victim.
That person's going to give us the most information. Also, we need to either include or eliminate them from our investigation.
But in this case, the person closest to the victim, Deidre Malachowski's fiancé, wasn't talking. He hired an attorney and refused to cooperate with the investigation. Detectives visited Deidre's neighborhood and spoke to Donna Yerke, one of the victim's oldest friends. Both Yerke and her husband Alan expressed fears that Deidre's fiancé could have killed her. Deidre had told the Yerkes she had a violent confrontation with him the day before she disappeared.
During that fight, he had actually placed his hand around her throat in a strangling position to control her. This, of course, raised a lot of queries as to how heavily he was involved with that.
Given the violent nature of their relationship, investigators had to consider the fiancé as their prime suspect. But without any physical evidence, there was no way to pursue a case against him. And until more information surfaced, Hodges knew they'd have to be patient.
We only had a one-time shot at things like this. If you don't have enough evidence when you initially arrest, then you may not be able to proceed with the case. And we didn't want anything like that. We didn't want an acquittal in a case. We wanted a solid case.
But as the months wore on, investigators realized they might be waiting forever. In the interim, new cases demanded their attention. Almost 9 months to the day after Deidre Malachowski's unsolved murder, another body was found in the mountains. The young girl was fully clothed, but barefoot. Her shoes were found a few feet away. There were no obvious injuries to the body, nor any clues left behind by her killer. The victim was identified as Danielle Bonfield, a 12-year-old reported missing that morning. Danielle's body had been found more than 20 miles from her home. Considering the rugged terrain, investigators knew the girl couldn't have made it that far on foot. And whoever had driven her there left no clues. Nor was any evidence recovered from the victim's home. Leslie Bonfield, the girl's mother, had found nothing out of place. There was no sign of a struggle. Bonfield told investigators that on the night of her daughter's disappearance, Danielle was to stay home while she joined friends for drinks. By the time she returned later that evening, Danielle was gone. Detectives searched the area around the Bonfields' home and canvassed the immediate neighborhood. They came away empty-handed. The sheriff's department then traced phone calls made from the Bonfield home on the night of Danielle's disappearance. At 8:15 p.m., a call was made to a pager registered to one of the friends Leslie Bonfield was out drinking with. It was Alan Yerke.
And upon hearing Mr. Yerke's names, my ears naturally pricked up, and it was like, whoa, what are you talking about, Alan Yerke?
Alan Yerke, a witness from the Malachowski murder, had now surfaced on the periphery of the Bonfield murder. He was brought in for questioning. Yerke told police that he was out with Leslie Bonfield and some friends the night Bonfield's daughter disappeared. He said he received a page from Danielle at around 8 p.m. Instead of telling Leslie Bonfield about it, Yerke decided to leave the bar and look in on the girl himself. Yerke told investigators Danielle was fine when he left the house. There was reason to doubt his story, however. Yerke's criminal history revealed that the 29-year-old handyman and part-time computer technician had once been convicted of sexually assaulting his ex-roommate. Detectives obtained a warrant to search Yerke's car. It was impounded and analyzed by the Colorado Springs Police Department. The vehicle was littered with garbage, clothing, and papers. Criminalist Charles Green would have to process the mess with the precision of an archaeologist.
When we completed the photography, then of course we entered the vehicle. We had to enter that and remove items layer by layer, collecting any items that could possibly have evidentiary value. Mike, let's get this stuff out of here. You might check up the blood. I'm looking at the blood.
Beneath the piles of clutter, the car yielded 2 pieces of crucial evidence: Danielle's watch and her belt. The belt, investigators believed, may have been used to strangle her. Green found more menacing evidence as the search continued.
We discovered almost immediately blood pattern stains that were located on the front windshield. These blood patterns were quite definitive. Another group over here.
The pattern of the blood seemed to be the result of blunt force trauma.
We're doing a presumptive blood test here.
Swabs were taken and sent to the lab. These samples matched the victim's blood type. Alan Yerke was arrested for the murder of Danielle Bonfield. Having tied Yerke to the murder of the young girl, investigators now hoped they could find some link to Deidre Malachowski, the waitress found murdered 9 months earlier. Blood and DNA samples were taken from the suspect. They matched the fluid samples found in Malachowski's remains. Although investigators confronted Yerke with this damning evidence, he denied knowing anything about Deidre's murder. He also claimed he had slept with the victim several days before her disappearance, but that it had been consensual. Yerke just explained away any biological evidence they might find. Investigators would have to dig deeper.
Okay, I want to look at that too. Get some more bags.
Yerke's cluttered car yielded the pivotal clues in the Bonfield murder. They hoped that it would also contain some link to the Malachowski case. Hours were spent revisiting the vehicle and its contents, but not a single scrap of evidence relating to Deidre Malachowski was recovered. Nor were there any obvious clues in the trunk. Instead, technicians found it filled with computer disks and software.
John, I got this thing open a minute ago. You want to take a look inside?
The trunkload of floppies and CD-ROMs hardly seemed a momentous find. But as today's detectives know, It could provide a treasure trove of evidence. Though traditional methods had failed to turn up any clues, this stash gave forensic specialist John St. Augustine a whole new hunting ground.
Computer forensics is important because we're coming across more media in more scenes now. It's no longer just, here's the bloody knife and the gun or the bullet. Now we're finding more and more pieces of digital media.
Altogether, 50 CD-ROMs and 400 to 500 floppy disks were seized from Yerke's car and home. The suspect's wife had mentioned that he liked to keep a journal. Though they knew it was a long shot, investigators needed to find out if he'd ever confessed his crimes electronically. St. Augustine had a tough road ahead of him. In order to preserve the integrity of the evidence, he had to copy every file found on every disk, the equivalent of an entire room filled floor to ceiling with paper. Next, he had to search through individual files, looking for anything associated with a crime.
I soon discovered a floppy containing the resume of Mr. Yerke, some jobs that he had worked at, as well as a file called My Sins. I attempted to open it by double-clicking on it, for lack of a better word, to open the file. Immediately, what came up was, this file is password protected.
He tried every method he knew to crack the code, but still couldn't penetrate Yerke's defense. It was obvious that whatever was in this document, Yerke had done everything to keep his sins hidden. Investigators in Colorado believed that Alan Yerke was responsible for the death of his wife's best friend. But without any physical evidence linking him to the crime, their only hope of solving the case was to hack an encrypted computer file entitled My Sins. With the help of some powerful software, John St. Augustine was finally able to obtain Yerke's secret password. God help.
When I entered the password, God help, into the My Sins document, immediately up came a screen that said, My Sins is reserved by Alan R. Yerke. Now I knew that Mr. Yerke was the author of this particular file.
St. Augustine was finally able to open the cryptic file. A list of Alan Yerke's crimes appeared on the screen, including the murders he'd committed. Perhaps more chilling was a list of murders he planned to commit in the future. Included in the list was the rape and murder of Deidre Malachowski. This on-screen confessional bore out investigators' suspicions. The man in their custody was a calculating predator whose appetite was only growing. Police surmised that Yerke picked up Deidre while she was waiting to catch a bus into town. He overpowered the young woman and killed her. Yerke then drove to the mountains, where he hid the young waitress's body. But the killer couldn't keep from confessing. Alone, in front of his computer, Yerke divulged his secrets. Had investigators not caught him when they did, Yerke's list of sins may have grown. Faced with this evidence, Yerke pled guilty to the murders of Danielle Bonfield and Deidre Malachowski. He is serving a life sentence plus 50 years without the possibility of parole. Without the skill of the forensics team, the path between Yerke and his victim would have been impossible to trace. In Texas, the trail was clearly marked in blood. Just off the Texas coast, The island of Galveston woos residents with 32 miles of Gulf beaches and balmy weather year-round. But like human nature, the wind and waves belie a furious capacity for violence. On a Saturday morning in June 1995, a Galveston man found some money on a suburban lawn. It was covered with blood. Searching for the source of the bloody bill, he noticed that the back door of a nearby building was open. The apartment inside was being renovated, but no one responded to his calls.
Miller! Hey, Miller! Hey, come on, Miller. Miller!
Inside, he found his neighbor, 32-year-old John Miller, dead. He'd been stabbed. Officers from the Galveston Police Department were called to the scene. Smears and spatters of blood marked the walls, ceiling, and floors of every room in the 5-bedroom apartment. Detective Norman Giles knew that these patterns could be crucial in solving the crime.
It was obvious initially we're going to have to collect blood and we're going to have to protect the crime scene. So most of our efforts initially were at protecting the integrity of the blood evidence that was going to be there.
Forensic experts were called in to photograph and diagram every single stain. Identification officer Gary Jones had never seen such a large amount of blood evidence at a single crime scene.
As soon as I walked in, I knew that this was going to be a rather extraordinary type case. There was virtually every conceivable type of bloodstain pattern incorporated into this one scene. Just the first visualization of that scene immediately told me I'm going to be here for quite a while due to the extent of the bloodshed that occurred during this struggle.
It appeared the victim had taken on more than one attacker. 3 distinct sets of footprints were marked in blood. One set matched the victim's boots. The second appeared to be prints made by a man's tennis shoes. A third set of smaller barefoot prints belonged to either a woman or a child. One of the barefoot prints contained sufficient ridge detail for identification purposes, should a suspect ever surface. This print was cut from the floor. Whoever was responsible for the murder had not emerged from the struggle unscathed. Droplets of blood found near the print suggested that he or she had been bleeding from the leg. Following the trail of blood droplets, investigators found what appeared to be the murder weapon, a 4-inch single-edged blade. The knife was taken into evidence, but all fingerprints had been wiped from its surface. The trail didn't stop there.
Blood went down the stairs, out to the road, then went south on the road to a parking lot near the seawall.
There, the path of blood disappeared into the water. With no fingerprints, no witnesses, and no apparent motive, the case ground to a halt. In speaking with friends of the victim, detectives learned that Miller was last seen the night before the murder at a neighborhood bar. A barmaid told police that Miller had been hanging out with a couple of drifters. The man was in his 30s, the woman in her 20s. Whether they were suspects or witnesses remained to be seen. But these vagrants could be anywhere by now. Without knowing their names, chances of finding them were slim. Investigators also learned that Miller owned a truck that was now missing.
We spoke with the family members that we could locate there at the scene, and nobody knew the location of the truck. So we thought that the truck was probably stolen at the time of the murder.
Although an all-points bulletin was issued on the missing pickup, it was nowhere to be found in the Galveston area. Several days later, Houston police reported they'd found the truck in a parking lot. They immediately arranged to have it returned to Galveston. Meanwhile, Giles canvassed businesses along the Houston highway where the truck had been found.
We came to a hotel along the way, and we went inside and checked with the clerk, and the clerk actually did remember seeing a male and female that fit the description of the persons that had been seen with Mr. Miller in Galveston. They said the female was walking. She appeared to be limping.
Police believed the woman had received the injury at John Miller's apartment. But even with a wounded leg, the couple managed to stay one step ahead of police. Identification officer Gary Jones was brought in to process the truck, which had just been towed back to Galveston. He wasn't optimistic about what he'd find.
One of the primary concerns that we had at that time was how much contamination had occurred to the vehicle during its transport and the time that it had been sitting idle in Houston.
Jones processed the truck for fingerprints. On one of the door handles, he found the impression of a single thumb. The print was lifted and submitted to a computerized fingerprint identification system. A week later, the system came back with a hit. The fingerprint belonged to a man who had been arrested just months before in Lubbock. His name was Charles Wayne Keese. He had a history of arrests for violent crimes. Linking Keese to the victim's vehicle was a positive step, but it only showed an association with the victim. It didn't prove Keese had done anything violent.
So we had Mr. Keese's fingerprints on the truck, but we knew he'd been in the truck on times other than the time of the murder.
Through food stamp records, police finally found Keese and his girlfriend in Lubbock, some 500 miles away. Armed with a warrant, detectives brought them to Galveston for questioning. Guilty or not, Keese and his girlfriend were among the last people to see John Miller alive. Investigators were eager to speak with them. While the girlfriend's footprints were taken, investigators turned their attention to Keese. Keese admitted that he and his girlfriend had hung out with Miller at a bar on the night in question. He said that Miller then drove them to a pool hall where his truck broke down. There, Keese said, they went their separate ways. His girlfriend's footprint had been compared to the bloody print found at the crime scene. The size of the prints was the same, but technicians would have to be more precise. Like fingerprints, toe prints have a unique pattern of loops and whorls that can be used for identification. Technicians compared the details of the crime scene toe prints with those taken from Keese's girlfriend. They matched perfectly.
We had her foot in blood in Mr. Miller's house, so we knew that she was there at the time of the murder.
Police confronted Keese with the footprint evidence and told him that they could prove he and his girlfriend were with Miller when he died. Keese then admitted that he'd stabbed Miller, but said that it was self-defense. He claimed Miller had been the aggressor. Police didn't believe that it would take brutal force for Keese to protect himself against an unarmed man. But without proof, it was possible that a jury might side with Keese. Galveston police faced a new hurdle. Unless the evidence could distinguish murder from self-defense, the suspect's word would prevail. The only hope for justice was to coax the victim's story from the trail he left in blood. Police in Galveston, Texas didn't believe Charles Keese's claim of self-defense. They thought he was a murderer. To prove it, they turned to the evidence.
The key to success in working a crime scene is being able to listen and understand what that crime scene is telling you. In this case, it involved listening to what was left by the victim in his own blood.
To illustrate the brutality of the murder and disprove the suspect's account, Jones needed to reconstruct the crime from the patterns of blood. Investigators found two distinct sets of shoe prints at the crime scene and one set of footprints. Using photographs as a reference, Jones traced each player's prints through a layout of the home. Jones theorized that Keese attacked Miller and pursued him to a corner of the room. The victim's boot prints were followed closely by Keese's tennis shoe prints. Keese's girlfriend got caught up in the struggle. Her bare footprints show that she ran out the back door. Miller's boot prints moved toward the front door. The killer's prints followed. Blood spatter on the door led police to suspect that the fatal blow was delivered as Miller tried to escape. He never made it. He slid down the wall and collapsed on the floor. Jones's reconstruction impugned Keese's self-defense plea and proved that Miller had been the victim of a vicious and unrelenting attack. Investigators believe that Miller offered the drifters a place to stay on the night in question. Possessive of his girlfriend, Keese flew into a jealous rage. He stabbed Miller while the unarmed victim fought to get away. Thanks to the detailed reconstruction of the crime, Charles Wayne Keese was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Charges against his girlfriend were dropped. At the crime scene in Texas, a confession was etched in blood. But the line between malice and misfortune isn't always so clear. On a Saturday evening in November 1987, paramedics responded to a 911 call from a rural Wisconsin home. Walter Reeder told the paramedics that his wife had shot herself in the bedroom. 21-year-old Paula Reeder was found face up on the floor, dead. She had a bullet wound in the side of her head. Reeder told paramedics that he'd found his hunting gun next to her body. He'd returned it to its case to keep it away from his small children. Detective Ken Peters of the Dodge County Sheriff's Department was assigned to the investigation. Though it appeared to be a suicide, Peters treats all violent deaths as homicides and works backwards.
Once you rule it a suicide and put it on paper, or you remove bodies and evidence, you cannot place that evidence or the body back there. You do a complete and thorough investigation, no matter how many hours it takes. And if you feel certain and you get a second opinion or even a third opinion from professionals that it is in fact a suicide, then you can live with yourself and you're comfortable with that.
But analyzing the crime scene only raised more questions. The position of the victim's body sent up red flags.
The history of these cases are like that you drop to the floor like a sack of potatoes as soon as you take a round to the head.
And yet, Paula Reeder was found with her head 3 inches under the footboard of the bed. It defied logic, unless something or someone had moved her. The condition of the weapons seemed odd as well. Because they're fired at such close range, guns used in suicides are normally covered in blood and tissue. The gun found in the Reeder house was relatively clean, with small amounts of blood on the barrel, butt, and grip. To determine who pulled the trigger, Peters asked for a gunmetal residue test. When a weapon is fired, it releases microscopic bits of metal onto the shooter's hand. Swabs taken from the hands of Paula and Walter Reeder were tested at the lab. Both of the Reeders tested positive, but in low levels. The inconclusive findings indicated they had both touched the gun. It didn't prove who fired it. Detective Peters brought Reeder in for questioning. Walter Reeder said that he and his daughter Misty were in the basement stacking wood when they heard a loud thump upstairs. He raced upstairs to the bedroom where he found Paula on the floor. When asked why his wife would want to kill herself, Reeder said he didn't know. Peters hoped he could find the answer that Walter Reeder couldn't supply. He went to talk to Paula's mother. Paula's mother told investigators that she had been worried about her daughter. At Paula's request, she had flown into Wisconsin the day before. She said that Paula and the children were going to leave Walter and return with her to Florida. It had been a bad marriage from the start. Against her mother's wishes, Paula married Walter when she was 16 and he was 40. Over the years, the relationship went from bad to worse.
Where are you going now?
Preliminary autopsy findings confirmed that Paula's health had declined. The once 110-pound woman weighed only 80 pounds at the time of her death. But a bad marriage doesn't prove murder. Without some substantial evidence of foul play, Paula Reeder's death would remain a mystery. Investigators in the Paula Reeder case were still not convinced that the young mother had killed herself. The pathologist confirmed that a single bullet killed the victim, but was unable to determine whether it had been suicide or homicide. If it was suicide, however, the entry point of the bullet was one of the most unusual investigators had ever seen. Most self-inflicted wounds are to the mouth or front of the head. In this case, the gun barrel had been placed behind the victim's ear, angled toward the back of her head. It defied logic and physics. Before she was buried, investigators measured the victim's limbs and did some calculations. Paula Reeder was 5 feet tall. Her arms were only 24 inches long. Factoring in the length of the gun, investigators determined her arm was barely long enough for her to press the weapon to her own head. The only way she could have fired it was if she had pulled the trigger with her thumb. Suspicions mounted, but investigators still lacked hard evidence. The evidence they did have only raised more questions. A hollow point bullet was removed from the victim's skull and sent to the lab. Analysis revealed something odd. A piece of plastic the size of a hard candy wrapper was adhered to the shell casing. Under the microscope, investigators could see that it was torn and stretched. They had never seen anything like it. Simulating the awkward way in which Paula Reeder would have to have held the gun, ballistics experts fired test rounds through different types of plastic. But unlike the sample recovered from the victim's head, these samples simply melted and burned. Experts could find no explanation for this phenomenon. Though they didn't have the physical evidence to prove murder, Detective Peters stayed in touch with the victim's family and friends, hoping some crucial testimony would eventually surface. The more he learned about Paula's relationship with Walter, the more he believed that her husband killed her. A number of letters Paula had written to friends and family spoke of Walter's abuse. She told friends that Walter actually showed her the bullets that would end her life. Just days before her death, she wrote, "I feel like I am going to be murdered." Despite the circumstantial evidence incriminating Walter Reeder, Detective Peters didn't have enough evidence to prove his case. His superiors called an end to the investigation.
Walter Reeder is a very convincing person, and the sheriff therefore came to me and asked that I close the case out on several occasions, which I would not do.
But Peters didn't have the final word. Without a clear determination of homicide from the pathologist, nor any conclusive evidence that Walter Reeder had pulled the trigger, the district attorney knew he couldn't get a criminal conviction. The case was closed. In rural Wisconsin, more than a year after her mysterious death, the Paula Reeder case was revisited. Newly elected Sheriff Stephen Fitzgerald met with Detective Peters.
Ken never felt comfortable with the suicide closure of this case and had always suspected that Mr. Reeder was more involved in this than we actually thought from the initial investigation.
Although the sheriff reopened the murder investigation, his department still lacked the evidence they needed to move the case forward. Dodge County detectives hoped they'd get the proof they needed from the Wisconsin State Crime Lab. They scheduled a visit with forensic scientist Ken Olson.
So we asked that they bring the photos of the crime scene, the gun, the plastic that was recovered from the victim's head, and her clothing. So they brought that stuff out, and we had a meeting and went over the case.
The forensics team pored over the crime scene photographs, looking for some proof of murder in the blood spatter.
Well, we don't want to.
But as they studied the evidence, their attention quickly turned to the mysterious piece of plastic found on the murder bullet.
This plastic has a dome shape to it, like bubble pack does.
One of the scientists offhandedly observed that its domed shape resembled bubble wrap. At just the same moment, a colleague made a pivotal discovery. He had been carefully scrutinizing a photograph of the closet where the gun was stored. wads of bubble wrap were clearly visible.
And it was about that time I think we all thought, well, what happens if somebody tried to wrap bubble pack around a gun and make it act like a silencer? Could we get plastic to travel with the bullet?
If Walter Reeder wrapped the weapon before shooting his wife, it could explain how plastic became attached to the bullet. Investigators followed up on their hunch. At the time of the shooting, there were only 4 manufacturers making the kind of bubble wrap found in the Reeder's closet. Samples of each type of wrap were analyzed with an infrared spectrophotometer to ascertain their chemical composition. They compared these results with the plastic recovered from the victim. They found a match.
This would be the piece of plastic.
Color, thickness, and composition were identical. Hoping to prove that the plastic could travel with the bullet, technicians fashioned a silencer made of this particular bubble wrap. Finally, they were able to reproduce the odd discovery made at autopsy. The bubble wrap silencer explained how the square of plastic adhered to the bullet. To try and explain the lack of blood spatter on the gun, investigators did another test fire with the silencer, this time into a blood source.
We got the same type of patterns, or the lack of patterns, that we would have suspected that you would get by doing that. The gun was clean, the barrel was clean, there was no blood present on the gun. There was some void areas created from that, and that was consistent with what we had at the crime scene.
Police, open up!
You're under arrest.
With forensics results to support a murder charge, the case was finally strong enough to go to court. On October 29, 1991, nearly 2 years after the death of his wife, Walter Reeder was arrested.
I mean, it's not like you ever do anything about this.
Investigators believe that on the evening she died, Paula and Walter had an argument. Walter, angry that his wife was going to leave him, decided to end the marriage on his terms.
Why don't you do the things that help me out around?
Walter Reeder knocked his wife unconscious. He wrapped the weapon in plastic, placed it against his wife's head, and fired. Thanks to relentless detective work, the evidence persuaded the jury.
I can remember that day very vividly when we were all called back into the courtroom and the jury did hand down their decision. I was very relieved for the family, and also as an officer you always feel somewhat satisfied when you think that justice has been done.
By staging a suicide, Walter Reeder very nearly got away with murder. Bringing him to justice was well worth the years of frustration that led to his conviction. He was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Clever criminals try to stay one step ahead of police by concealing their tracks. But science gives law enforcement a jump start in their pursuit, helping police track killers along the faintest trails of evidence. "7 years after a woman vanishes, a trail of evidence leads investigators to an isolated boat ramp on the Missouri River. They must pull proof of her murder from the murky river. In a rural Virginia county, a skull and a piece of jewelry are the only clues police have to identify a victim. But will it be enough to catch a killer? A woman is missing for weeks. When her body is discovered, the police must piece together their case from a few torn shreds of tape. When someone disappears, it's difficult for police to prove murder without a body. But today, forensic science can find justice for a victim months and sometimes even years after they have gone missing. Maryville, Missouri is a small Midwestern town. But in 1990, it was caught in the grip of a big city problem. To combat a growing methamphetamine industry, investigators sought help from those on the inside. Christine Elkins had been arrested for selling the drug. In exchange for immunity, Christine cooperated with authorities by helping to build a case against her supplier. She agreed to tape their next meeting with a microcassette recorder concealed in her clothing. On July 26, 1990, under the watchful eyes of investigators, Elkins met with the distributor at his house.
You got the stuff?
From the moment she walked in, Tony Emery, her dealer, was suspicious.
What are you doing?
He grabbed Christine and searched her.
I don't know what you're talking about. No, you are.
He threatened to kill her if she ever betrayed him.
When you cool off, okay?
Agent Mike Schmitz headed up the case for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms.
She came back afterwards extremely upset, stating that he knew that I was wired. He attempted to locate the recorder. She was extremely upset.
Christine told agents that she was afraid for her safety. They urged her to stay away from Tony. When agents tried to listen to the tape, it was indecipherable. The case against Tony Emery would have to be made on informant testimony. A few weeks before Christine was scheduled to testify against him, police received a call from her mother. She hadn't heard from her daughter in several days, and she was worried. A search of Christine's house indicated no sign of a struggle. Her car, a maroon Oldsmobile, was gone. Missouri State Police worked with the ATF on the Emery narcotics case. Investigator Larry Bodenhammer.
Well, the investigation changed after her disappearance because after a period of time, it was like, well, where is she? You know, what has happened to her? Has she left on her own accord, or has something happened to her?
Investigators interviewed Christine's friends and acquaintances. One friend told police she'd seen her around 10 o'clock the night she disappeared. Christine had asked her to watch her son for a few minutes while she met someone. Christine made a chilling prediction as she left. If she wasn't back in a few minutes, she'd be in the morgue. No one had seen her since.
All right, I need to bring everybody up to date.
The ATF and the police now suspected that Tony Emery was behind her disappearance. He had a strong motive, but without evidence of an actual crime, authorities could not prove his involvement. 3 weeks later, Maryville police received a tip from a federal drug enforcement agent in Colorado.
Sergeant Strong.
A methamphetamine manufacturer facing time in federal prison wanted to make a deal.
Get our plans together and stuff.
He claimed he knew about the murder of a female informant in Maryville.
All right, that'll work.
Investigators
Talk to you later.
feared he was referring to Christine Elkins. Maryville police and ATF agents flew to Colorado to question James Witt. He told them he manufactured methamphetamine for Tony Emery and his cousin Herb Emery. He said he'd heard the two men talking about killing an informant in Missouri. In exchange for leniency, Witt agreed to meet Herb Emery and wear a wire. Authorities hoped their conversation would provide details of the alleged murder and possibly lead them to Christine Elkins. 3 months after Christine's disappearance, Witt met Herb Emery in a restaurant parking lot. Agents listened to their conversation from a car nearby. Witt pretended he needed to get rid of a body and asked for advice. Herb Emery told him the best way to dispose of a body was to put it in the trunk of a car and sink it in a rock quarry. It was investigators' first clue. Using detailed maps, they identified rock quarries deep enough to conceal a car. But the Midwest, famous for its native limestone, had literally hundreds of quarries. To narrow their search further, they had to think like a killer.
If you've got a person in the trunk of the car, what would you do? Would you drive a long ways when it wasn't your car? You could break down. If you were to find a rock quarry, it would have to be something close. It would have to be something that you didn't have to drive. It's a very wet season. You wouldn't have to drive through a field because you might get stuck.
They focused on a 75-mile radius, but that still left hundreds of possibilities. Over the next several months, investigators systematically searched those rock quarries for a car containing a body. They found nothing. The ATF, the Missouri State Police, and Maryville Police considered the Emerys dangerous, but lacked sufficient evidence to support a murder charge. Setting up a task force, investigators devised a strategy to get them off the street until they could prove murder. Federal agents again used James Witt, this time to set up a methamphetamine buy. Herb and Tony Emery met Witt at a prearranged location. Agents observed as Tony Emery gave Witt $20,000 for several pounds of the drug.
ATF, on the floor!
They moved in to make the arrest.
Don't move. Get on the floor right now.
In the summer of 1991, Herb and Tony Emery were convicted of conspiracy to keep and sell methamphetamine. They were sentenced to 9 years in a federal penitentiary. With the Emerys in prison, authorities were able to focus on the disappearance and possible homicide of Christine Elkins. According to Maryville police investigator Randy Strong, Tony Emery was a dangerous man to cross.
The community had a great fear of Tony Emery. If we had a witness to him doing a crime, they simply wouldn't come forward, or they would back out of the case. No one wanted to talk about it because they were afraid of what he might do to them.
But with the Emery cousins safely behind bars, authorities hoped their associates would no longer be afraid to talk. And they had a lead. In their taped conversations, Herb Emery had told James Witt about a third man who was present the night of the murder. Bobby Miller was a friend of Herb's in Colorado. But when investigators tried to question Miller, they got nowhere. Even from prison, the Emerys cast a frightening shadow. Investigators went to one of the Emerys' rental properties mentioned in a monitored conversation between Herb Emery and James Witt. They suspected that this was the site where Christine had been murdered. The woman who answered the door confirmed that she rented the house from the Emerys. Once inside, investigators were dismayed to find the house had been gutted and remodeled. If Christine had been murdered on the premises, all evidence of the crime had been destroyed. Out of options, the investigators re-examined their case files, looking for a clue, something they might have missed the first time, that would link the Emerys to Christine's murder. Investigators found phone records linking Bobby Miller to Herb Emery around the time Christine disappeared. They also learned that Bobby Miller had rented a truck near Maryville the night Christine was last seen. It suggested his involvement, but they had to find a way to get him to talk.
Yeah, this is pretty creepy.
In September 1996, 6 years after Christine's disappearance, police went back to Miller.
Okay, Bobby, you know why
They
you're
offered
here
him
today.
immunity in exchange for his testimony.
And your attorney has given us
On the
permission
advice
to
of his
give your
attorney,
statement.
Miller took the deal.
To really pin all this down.
Miller admitted he was outside Herb Emery's rental property the night Christine Elkins disappeared. He said he watched her go inside, where Herb and Tony waited. When he heard screams, he panicked and drove off. Investigators believed they knew what happened next. But without a body, making a murder case against the Emerys would be difficult, if not impossible. 7 years had passed since Christine Elkins' disappearance. The ATF and the Maryville, Missouri police had Bobby Miller's account of her murder, but no evidence to back it up. And they were running out of time. The suspects in her disappearance, Tony and Herb Emery, were about to be paroled from prison. Determined to prevent their release, authorities scrutinized every facet of their case. They decided to take a closer look at the Emerys' associates. Dana Kleiser wasn't directly involved with Emery or his drug ring. In fact, investigators interviewed him only because Tony had once dated his sister. According to Kleiser, Tony Emery arrived at his rural home the night Christine disappeared. He asked to borrow some gas, then asked Kleiser to show him a nearby boat ramp. Wary of Emery's reputation, Kleiser didn't ask any questions, but led him to a boat ramp on the Missouri River. Tony told him to wait several miles away. Pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. Investigators now believed they knew the location of the car containing Christine's body.
We now realized that we had to try, at least plan, to recover a body out of the Missouri River. And I think the thing that was going through both of our minds was the Great Flood of 1993. And I know I was thinking that, unfortunately, Christine is probably in the Gulf someplace now after that flood.
The currents of the Missouri River are normally powerful enough to move something the size of a car great distances. During the 1993 floods, the river became a raging torrent that overflowed its banks and caused millions of dollars in damage. It was yet another long shot, but it was all investigators had to go on. To make a case against the Emerys, they had to find Christine's car. They enlisted the help of a non-profit organization called NecroSearch International. These Colorado-based scientists helped law enforcement around the world find clandestine graves and hidden evidence. When Clark Davenport, a forensic geophysicist with NecroSearch, arrived at the boat ramp, he'd already amassed a wealth of data.
Prior to coming out to take magnetic measurements, we looked at the make and model of the car talked to the manufacturer to determine the mass of metal in the motor. We also looked at the currents in the river bottom conditions, river speed, the floods that happened since the car had gone into the river, and the float time from the manufacturer, how long they figured a car would float.
Armed with that information, necrosearch scientists spent 2 days searching a 6-mile area adjacent to the boat ramp. They used a magnetometer, a torpedo-shaped device that measures changes in magnetic fields. Floating several feet below the river's surface, it takes readings every 2 seconds and recognizes large masses such as a car. Used in conjunction with global positioning satellites, the magnetometer enabled necrosearch scientists to precisely pinpoint 5 locations where abnormal masses, or anomalies, were present on the riverbed.
I felt pretty confident that the anomalies were consistent with what I would expect from a car of that size.
The next day, investigators returned to the boat ramp with a team of divers. Fighting the murky river's current, the divers searched the 5 areas Davenport pinpointed as likely locations for the car. Within hours, one of the divers surfaced holding up a Missouri license plate. Against all odds, investigators had finally found Christine Elkins' car.
This was an incredible moment. It was kind of like Excalibur coming up out of the lake with the sword. You know, it's just amazing. Just the emotion that was involved in that. We knew that we were getting closer now. We were going to put closure on this case.
Divers attached steel cables to the car and pulled it from the water. It was sent to a Maryville garage for processing. Inside, forensic examiners discovered a piece of wood wedged between the driver's seat and the accelerator. In the trunk, they found bones wrapped in carpet padding. Using hospital x-rays, the medical examiner confirmed that they had finally found the remains of Christine Elkins. The autopsy revealed a large hole in the skull, consistent with blunt force trauma. Christine had apparently been beaten to death. Investigators had the physical evidence they needed to charge the Emorys with murder. They believed Tony found out Christine was going to testify against him and offered her money to disappear. She was too terrified to turn him down. But when she went to the house that night, the Emorys had other plans. Once inside, Tony and Herb attacked Christine. Tony dealt the lethal blow, striking her in the head with a heavy flashlight. Her body was wrapped in carpet padding, put in the trunk of her car, and driven to the boat ramp. There, Tony rigged the accelerator and sent the car down the ramp into the river. Herb Emery pled guilty to murder and was sentenced to 22 years in prison. Tony Emery was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In Maryville, authorities knew the name of the victim and suspected killers, but struggled for 7 years to find her body. In a rural Virginia county, investigators had to identify a body before the search for a murderer could even begin. Amelia County is a sprawling community, located in the rolling hills of western Virginia. It's a neighborly area with a low crime rate. Not the place for murder. In 1990, while hunting for deer, a man made a gruesome discovery. On an embankment near a small creek, he found a human skull. He took it to the Amelia County Sheriff's Department. Sheriff Jimmy Weaver examined the skull. Its condition told him it had been outside for some time. The presence of a long reddish hair, as well as the skull's small size and features, suggested that the victim was probably female. Two opposing holes in the skull were consistent with entry and exit wounds made by a single bullet. Sheriff Weaver and his deputy went out to the scene.
On my way in, I was trying to think of who it could be. There was no one in Amelia missing. No one had called me. Amelia is a small, close county. If something happens, we know right away.
After securing the area, Weaver conducted a thorough search. They found more bones, jewelry, part of a blanket, and a piece of denim. Concerned that animals might have scattered additional clues, the investigators broadened their search. They soon discovered what appeared to be an arm bone and a gold bracelet. The evidence seemed to confirm Sheriff Weaver's original theory that the victim was female. Weaver sent the evidence to the Virginia State Medical Examiner's office in Richmond for analysis. Chief Medical Examiner Marcella Fierro examined the remains. The skull told her a great deal about the victim.
First, it showed that it was a young white female. Second, it showed that it had a gunshot wound and that there was injury related to this gunshot wound, and that the trajectory of where this bullet went in and where it fractured on the other side indicated it had a path that was lethal.
As the examination of the skeletal remains continued, the medical examiner's office was able to establish that the victim had been 5 feet 2 to 5 feet 4 inches tall, with reddish blonde hair. The description was distributed to law enforcement agencies across the state of Virginia. The search was on for any missing women matching Amelia County's Jane Doe. Now, Sheriff Weaver could only hope and wait. In January 1990, the Sheriff's Department in Amelia County, Virginia, needed a lead to establish the identity of skeletal remains found in an isolated area. It wasn't long in coming. Police in Chesapeake, Virginia, reported that a woman who fit the victim's description had been missing for 8 months. Dental records confirmed the victim was 29-year-old Regina Butkowski, known to her friends as Jeannie. The same day, deputies showed Jeannie's mother the jewelry recovered from the scene. She identified it as her daughter's. Chesapeake police forwarded the Butkowski case files to Amelia County. As Weaver reviewed them, he learned the circumstances of Jeannie's disappearance. On the evening of May 6, 1989, Jeannie's roommate discovered that the front door of their house had been kicked in. Concerned, she checked the parking lot for Jeannie's car. It wasn't there. She called Jeannie's mother, who said she'd last spoken to her daughter at 10:45 the night before. One fact in the police files immediately caught Sheriff Weaver's attention: Jeannie's stormy relationship with a man named Pernell Jefferson. Jeannie had met Jefferson at a local gym. He became her personal trainer, and the two dated for several months. When Jefferson became too possessive, Jeannie tried to distance herself from him, but he refused to back off.
One of the things that he had somewhat of an obsession with was with Regina. He was not going to accept the fact that she wasn't his.
Jefferson's obsession had become frighteningly clear when he allegedly kidnapped Jeannie in March 1989. But by an amazing stroke of luck, more than 7 minutes of that struggle had been recorded on her home answering machine.
It was a very dramatic tape. No one really knew how it was recorded, but it was. And it was a situation of you would hear her telling, "No, Purnell, don't hurt me, don't do things." And it proceeded on. You could hear noise in the background. And probably one of the most dramatic things of it is that at one time you heard this tremendously deep sob from Regina.
Weaver learned that Jeannie's roommate told Jefferson about the tape and threatened to call police. He released Jeannie. She refused to press charges against him, however, out of fear he might take out his anger on someone close to her. 2 months later, Jeannie Butkowski again disappeared. Sheriff Weaver focused the investigation on Purnell Jefferson. A lead came in from Jeannie's parents. They had received a letter regarding their daughter's car from an apartment complex in Richmond, Virginia, 130 miles away from Jeannie's home. The manager of the apartments alerted them that Jeannie's car had been sitting in the parking lot for 6 months. Investigators examined her car, hoping for clues to link Jefferson to the murder. They were disappointed. During the time the car had been there, it had been subjected to the elements.
When they had the flood in Richmond, it had been submerged in the flood. So a lot of the evidentiary value from that vehicle was lost.
But a new lead was quickly established. A resident of the apartment complex told investigators that he knew a man who used to drive the car. Investigators soon learned that Jeannie's car had changed hands several times. They eventually traced it to a man named Darrell Jones, who was incarcerated in Henrico County. Jones told deputies he bought the car from a local man named Wes Green. Green was with a stranger who claimed the car belonged to his girlfriend. He'd taken it away from her and driven it up from Chesapeake because he was angry with her. Investigators suspected the stranger was Purnell Jefferson. They wanted to know more and believed Wes Green might hold the key. They just needed to find him. As evidence against Purnell Jefferson mounted, the Amelia County Sheriff's Department believed his friend, Wes Green, might know more about the murder of Jeannie Butkowski. Deputies quickly tracked Green down to an apartment complex in Richmond. When questioned, he admitted he helped Jefferson get rid of Jeannie's car. The officer persisted. Green added that Jefferson had borrowed a co-worker's car around the time Jeannie disappeared. If the car had been used to dispose of her body, it was probable that incriminating evidence had been left behind. Deputies went to the appliance rental store where Purnell Jefferson had once worked. A co-worker confirmed that on May 5th, the day Jeannie disappeared, Jefferson had borrowed his car. He didn't return the vehicle until late that night. A few days later, Jefferson went to lunch and never returned. Investigators obtained permission to search the employee's car. The search yielded incriminating results. Technicians found traces of lime, a corrosive substance that hastens decomposition. More importantly, they found a reddish blonde hair similar to the one found on Jeannie Butkowski's skull. The hair was sent to the crime lab for analysis. A comparison indicated the two hairs were consistent in texture and color. Investigators now had their first physical evidence connecting Jefferson to Jeannie Butkowski's murder. Sheriff Weaver swore out a warrant for the arrest of Purnell Jefferson on capital murder charges. Authorities traced Jefferson to Stuart, Florida, where he'd moved shortly after Jeannie's disappearance.
Get down. All right. Clear left. Move. Clear.
On February 3rd, 1990, a SWAT team burst into the suspect's home to find him hiding in a closet. They quickly took him into custody.
Don't move.
5 months later, Jefferson was extradited to Amelia County to stand trial for murder. Based on the evidence, investigators pieced together the events of the night Jeannie Butkowski died. On May 5th, 1989, Pernell Jefferson and Wes Green drove from Richmond to Chesapeake and broke into Jeannie's house as she slept. Jeannie struggled with Jefferson, who dragged her outside. He forced her into her own car and sped away. Green left separately. Although investigators never learned the precise location of her murder, they suspected Jefferson stopped at a remote area as he drove back to Richmond. He initially disposed of her body just outside the city. Fearing it might be discovered there, Jefferson recruited Wes Green to help him move the body to Amelia County, where they buried it in a shallow grave. Pernell Jefferson thought he'd covered his tracks, but he underestimated Sheriff Weaver and his deputies.
He thought that he would bring her out to a rural county to where probably there was a rural law enforcement agency that wouldn't find it, or if they did, wouldn't solve it.
On March 28, 1991, Pernell Jefferson stood trial in Amelia County for killing Jeannie Butkowski. He was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 25 years. Wes Green was also charged and convicted for his role in Jeannie's abduction. In a murder investigation, police often discover the killer was close to the victim. But when a killer preys on a stranger, he is far more difficult to find. Nestled at the junction of two rivers, Wichita, Kansas is an all-American city with a touch of Old West charm. In this story, some of the names have been changed. On September 17, 1995, a woman phoned the Wichita police to report a missing person. She said her friend, Jody McCown, got into a maroon car on South Broadway around 1:30 the night before and hadn't returned. Most missing persons turn up within a few days, but South Broadway is a tough neighborhood plagued by drugs and prostitution. The Wichita police immediately began looking for Jody McCown. Detectives contacted Becky Sims, the woman who called in the missing persons report, hoping she could give them more information. Becky told them she was with Jody and her boyfriend, Keith Perry, the night Jody disappeared. A man drove up in a maroon car and told them he was looking for drugs. He introduced himself as Chester Higginbotham. Jody and Keith got into the car to talk to him. Becky heard the man offer Jody $200 to help him find drugs. Jody was reluctant, but Keith said they needed the money. He took $100 and got out of the car. Detective Dana Gouge recalls Becky was uneasy about the unusual circumstances of Higginbotham's request.
She was very suspicious of the situation because of the amount of money that was offered to Jody in this situation. She found it very strange. So strange that she wrote down the tag number of the car.
Investigators traced the license plate to a resident named Matthew Murphy, who lived in the nearby town of Newton. They wondered who Chester Higginbotham was and how he was connected to Murphy. They ran a background check on the two men.
I'm working on that now.
They also ran a background check on Jody's boyfriend, Keith Perry. They soon learned he had several outstanding drug warrants. During questioning, Perry confirmed Becky Sims's account of Jody's disappearance, with one major difference. He denied encouraging her to join Higginbotham in the car. Suspicious of Perry's involvement, detectives obtained a warrant to search his apartment. They didn't find anything to implicate him, but collected various items for possible DNA testing later. By now, investigators had the results from the background checks on Chester Higginbotham and Matthew Murphy. A comparison of fingerprints, photographs, and DMV records proved that Matthew Murphy and Chester Higginbotham were the same man. He had arrest records for burglary and theft going back many years under both names. In fact, there were several burglary charges pending against the Murphy alias in Kansas, as well as other states. The identity change and arrest records made Lieutenant Ken Landwehr of the Wichita Police Department highly suspicious.
When we find out that Matthew Murphy is an alias for Chester Higginbotham, it's again a clue that's going to show us that he's trying to hide his background, which has to mean that if he's hiding his background, there's probably something there that's more serious than burglaries and thefts.
Police called Higginbotham, who readily admitted he picked up Jody McCown on September 16th. But he said he dropped her off later and hadn't seen her since. Despite his claim, police were anxious to question him and search his residence.
We had hopes of being able to look through his house, try to determine whether or not he may have been involved in this, and also we had hopes that we would be able to find Jody alive.
Because Higginbotham was the last person seen with Jody, investigators were able to obtain a search warrant. Whatever he was hiding, investigators hoped to find the answers in his house. Wichita and Newton, Kansas police struggled to solve the disappearance of 28-year-old Jody McCown. She was last seen with a man named Chester Higginbotham. When investigators arrived at Higginbotham's house, nobody was there. Armed with a warrant, they began searching for clues. Detective T. Walton found nothing to suggest murder.
We were picking up fibers from carpeting. We were looking at his boots and his shoes. We were looking for a body, but we did not find a body inside the house.
Investigators were pondering their next move when a car pulled up in front of the house and a couple got out. The man calmly identified himself as Matthew Murphy and asked what was happening. Investigators produced a warrant and brought them to the station for questioning.
Have a seat in that chair.
Under interrogation, Murphy admitted his real name was Chester Higginbotham.
All right, Mr. Murphy, we're here to ask you a few questions.
He claimed he assumed an alias when he and his wife were placed into the federal witness protection program. According to Higginbotham, they were both witnesses in a mob-related murder case. Higginbotham reiterated his original account, that he picked up a girl fitting Jody McCown's description on September 16th. He said she was leaving town, so he dropped her off at the bus station around midnight.
Okay, we want you to.
To detectives, his story didn't quite ring true.
His times of dropping Jody off were not consistent with the times that our bus stations were open here in Wichita, either the city buses or the trailway buses. By going in and questioning him about that, he was still insistent that that's what he did. We knew that that could not have been true.
At the investigators' request, Higginbotham agreed to submit blood, hair, and saliva samples in the event a DNA comparison was called for in the future. Detectives also spoke with his wife, Vicky. She told them she didn't know her husband's real name was Higginbotham and contradicted his assertion that they were in the witness protection program. Vicky also said her marriage was troubled and she believed her husband was seeing other women. When asked about the night Jody McCown disappeared, Vicky said she came home from work and found a note from her husband. He said he was going to pick up parts for a car he was working on at a rented garage. When he hadn't arrived home by 3 a.m., Vicky drove to the garage to look for him. She said she caught him with a girl in his car. Although her husband wouldn't let her near the vehicle, she could see a girl with brown hair in the passenger seat. When Vicky confronted her husband, he claimed he was only giving the girl a ride. Vicky told him to come home immediately and then left. She said her husband arrived at the house about 5 minutes later. Based on the contradictory information obtained from Vicky, investigators questioned Higginbotham again. When they asked him about the girl at the garage, he claimed she was a friend from a local bar. But detectives suspected it was Jody McCown. Armed with a warrant, police searched Higginbotham's rented garage. Inside the suspect's car, they found a wad of green duct tape with hair stuck in the adhesive. Investigators also collected a white button with thread, black zip ties, a roll of green duct tape, and yellow rope. Detectives now believe Chester Higginbotham had murdered Jody McCown, but they still couldn't prove it without a body. Over the course of several weeks, investigators conducted a thorough search of the area surrounding his rented garage, but they didn't find anything. Without Jody McCown's body, it appeared Chester Higginbotham might be getting away with murder. Weeks after her disappearance, Wichita police were no closer to finding Jody McCown. Though they suspected a man named Chester Higginbotham was involved in her disappearance, they had no solid proof that a crime had even been committed. On October 11th, nearly a month after Jody's disappearance, a county groundskeeper working on the outskirts of town made a grisly discovery. The decomposed body of a woman lay in a ditch by the side of the road. When investigators arrived, they believed they'd finally found Jody McCown. The victim lay face down. A sweater and various undergarments were found near the body. As they searched for clues, the scene yielded a wealth of physical evidence.
She had the black plastic zip ties on her. She had green duct tape, just like was found in the shed, wrapped completely around her head, covering her nose and mouth area. The hands and feet were bound together with yellow rope that was similar to the rope that was all in the shed.
Fingerprint analysis confirmed the victim was Jody McCown. The medical examiner performed an autopsy and collected hair and fiber evidence from the body. She removed the duct tape for further analysis. Based on her findings, the medical examiner ruled the probable cause of death was asphyxiation caused by the duct tape covering the victim's nose and mouth. Due to the advanced decomposition of the body, the medical examiner was unable to determine whether Jody had been sexually assaulted, and there was insufficient material for DNA analysis. Detectives would have to build their case on other evidence. At the Wichita Police Department Crime Lab, evidence technician Patrick Cunningham hoped the duct tape would lead investigators to her killer. Using a solution called gentian violet, Cunningham looked for latent prints left on the tape. When the dye comes into contact with human protein residues, like those left by fingerprints, a vivid purple stain appears. When the tape from Jody McCown's body was put into the gentian violet solution, the results were disappointing.
And when we examined the back side of it, near the torn edge, there were some partial fingerprint impressions in that area, but there wasn't enough minutia for comparative purposes.
Forensic examiners had one last chance to make their case against Chester Higginbotham. At the Sedgwick County Regional Forensic Science Center in Wichita, forensic examiner Gary Miller would use fracture analysis to try to prove the duct tape from Jody's body came from the roll of tape in Higginbotham's rented garage. First, he painstakingly separated individual pieces from the tape recovered from Jody's body. Then, he analyzed the torn edges to establish the sequence in which the pieces had been torn from the roll.
Upon aligning the torn edge, we can go and see that the fractures, such as a jigsaw puzzle, fits together, but we're also able to align that the spacing between these threads are consistent, and visually we can tell from the color they are consistent.
Miller's analysis proved that the roll of duct tape collected from Higginbotham's garage had been used to bind Jody McCown. Forensic scientists also compared fibers recovered from the victim's clothing with carpet fibers taken from Higginbotham's car. Under a microscope, the texture and color of the fibers were consistent. Detectives had finally established physical links between Jody McCown and Chester Higginbotham. Scientists then compared the button and thread found at the garage with those on Jody McCown's shirt. They carefully measured the buttons, noting similarities in size, design, and material. The threads from the garage and the victim's shirt were consistent. In the end, forensic science had given detectives enough evidence to make a homicide charge stick. Based on the evidence, police reconstructed the sequence of events on the night Jody was murdered. They believe Chester Higginbotham took Jody McCown to the rental garage. He overpowered her, bound her with duct tape, and killed her. He then disposed of the body in a ditch by the side of the road. Chester Higginbotham, also known as Matthew Murphy, was convicted of first-degree murder and kidnapping. He was sentenced to 40 years without the possibility of parole. Once, time and the elements could destroy evidence linking a killer to his victim. But forensic technology has found new ways around these obstacles. Investigators can overcome impossible odds and bring justice to murder victims who were long considered missing. In New Mexico, a university co-ed is missing. Police must piece together a web of evidence to catch those responsible if they ever hope to find her alive. In Virginia, a killer uses the interstate as his personal dumping ground. A woman's body is found, and investigators have little time and few clues to lead them to a killer who could strike again. perpetrators try to conceal their crimes. Yet savvy investigators can take the most obscure data and recreate a murder. Though killers treacherously lure their victims by gaining their confidence, forensic science brings to light crimes committed and the betrayal of a blind trust. In this episode, some of the names have been changed. The town of Las Cruces, New Mexico sits on the Rio Grande, just north of Mexico. A vast desert surrounds the town, the perfect place to conceal a crime.
Emergency operator.
In January 1998, 911 dispatch received a call about a missing student named Carly Martinez. The 18-year-old freshman was beginning her second semester. When campus police arrived at the dorm, her roommate and parents were waiting.
Are you guys here about Carly?
They said it was unlike Carly to be out of touch.
Our daughter's been missing.
Her father told police they hadn't seen Carly since the day before. He and his wife had taken both girls to dinner and then dropped them off at their dorm room about 6:30 p.m.
Welcome. I needed it.
No one had seen or heard from Carly since. University police began a missing persons investigation. Her parents and roommate gave police a description and photograph of Carly. An extremely attractive girl with long dark hair and dark eyes. She was 5'6" and was last seen wearing jeans and a brown jacket. Desperate to find her, they posted flyers around the campus, hoping someone would recognize Carly and contact police. A massive search effort began. Officers and volunteers on horseback combed the surrounding desert area. Police gave dogs a piece of her clothing, hoping the scent would lead them to her. And investigators knew time was running out. If Carly were lost or wandering in the desert, she would not survive for very long. 4 days passed before they got the first break in the case. A fellow student, Samuel Sanchez, saw the missing person posters and contacted police. He said he saw Carly with Jesse Avalos, one of his co-workers at an off-campus bookstore. According to Sanchez, he saw them at a local roller rink on the night she disappeared. Jesse and Carly were skating together and holding hands. Sanchez told police the couple was later joined by Jason Desnoyers, one of Jesse's friends. They looked as if they were having a good time. The Las Cruces Police Department was called in to assist the university in the investigation. David Cortez was the lead detective.
The co-worker said that they closed the roller rink early that evening of the 14th and that he saw the three of them leaving together.
Campus police were the first to speak with Jesse Avalos.
Hello, how you doing?
They hoped he could
Jesse
provide
Avalos?
some answers.
How you doing? I'm Officer Acosta with University Police, and I just wanted to ask you about your whereabouts and if you were hanging out with Carly Martinez the other night. Yeah. Can you tell me what
Avalos
happened?
said he was with Carly on a date and that his friend, Jason Desnoyers, had joined them.
You know, we went
After skating, they had a few beers at a local bar. He told police Carly asked to be dropped off at a gas station near campus to use a payphone. He said he hadn't seen Carly since. Detective Cortez found the story odd. He questioned why Carly would use the payphone at the gas station and not at her dorm. The detective now wanted to speak with Jesse's friend, Jason Desnoyers. Maybe he could provide more information.
Here already. I take it, right?
Jason's story started out much like his friend's. He said Jesse Avalos was out on a date with Carly, and he met up with them at the skating rink.
Me and Jesse and his girl.
But then Jason's story changed.
Decided to go out and have a couple drinks.
He said they did not drop her off at a gas station. He said they took her back to school.
So we drove her over to her dorm and dropped her off.
And where'd you guys drop her off at?
Detective Cortez grew suspicious. He knew one or both of the boys was lying.
As far as your story goes, is where because of the conflicting stories, we felt that something wasn't right.
Detective Cortez asked for permission to search Jason Desnoyers' truck, hoping to uncover something that would bring them closer to finding Carly. Police noticed some scratches on the car's exterior, on both the driver's and the passenger's side. They extended the entire length of the car. Other than that, the car appeared to be spotless.
We noticed that the inside of the truck was very clean, as if it had been recently washed.
Several fibers were collected from the floor and seat. Using the chemical luminol, they checked for blood and other bodily fluids. If there were any present, they would glow under the light.
Upon performing the luminol test, we discovered that the center bench seat area was lighting up. This caught our attention, along with the scratches, some indicators to us that something just wasn't right.
When investigators examined the seat more closely, they discovered a large reddish-brown stain. A portion of the seat cushion was cut out and sent to the forensic lab for testing. At the New Mexico State Crime Lab, forensic scientist Mark Salvo tested the truck seat for human blood.
They had removed the foam cushion of the seat, and on there you could see obvious staining on that. Did presumptive examination for the presence of blood on the material side, which was you couldn't see anything, and got positives on that, as well as on the foam where you could see a stain and got a positive indication that there might be blood present on those items.
The seat cushion tested positive for human blood, but the recent cleaning of the seat had destroyed any DNA. As the police gathered evidence, the search for the young girl continued. Carly's disappearance was reported throughout the southwestern states.
Short notice here.
Authorities hoped the media coverage would prompt someone with information to come forward.
We just received, we got an updated photo on our victim, Carly. Just got that this morning from the family. And as the days followed, we had leads coming in, hundreds of leads. They were distributed to the task force and followed up on.
January 14th.
Investigators spoke to an informant who had recently been arrested on a parole violation. He was a neighbor of Jesse Avalos and claimed to have information regarding a jacket Jesse wore the night Carly disappeared.
Well, you're going to find out why you're here.
The man said that Jason Desnoyers approached him several days after Carly went missing and asked for a favor.
This subject told us that he took the jacket from Jason and hid it under some rolled up carpet just outside the apartment.
Police searched behind the apartment building where the witness said the jacket was located.
There's some carpet right over here.
They found a roll of carpet where he said it would be.
Let me unravel it.
Inside was a military-style jacket.
Yep.
It appeared to be stained with blood.
More stains on here.
The jacket was bagged and sent to the lab for further examination. After police obtained a warrant, they also searched inside Jesse Avalos' apartment.
Why don't you take the living room?
A team of forensic experts arrived and scoured each room. In the bathroom, investigators noticed reddish-colored stains they believed were blood. The shower curtain was collected for testing. In Jesse's bed, investigators found one long, dark hair. Some of Avalos' clothing was also bagged and sent to the lab. If the smudges found on the jacket and shower curtain were blood, forensic scientists would need to compare it to Carly's. Detective Cortez asked her family for personal items that might provide them with a DNA sample. Investigators were piecing together a case. They knew the longer it took, the hopes of ever finding the girl alive grew slim. They hoped the evidence would be the break they needed to lead them to the missing student. For 5 days, investigators in New Mexico searched for missing college student Carly Martinez. So far, the search yielded nothing. The two men last seen with the young woman claimed they went roller skating, had a few beers, and dropped her off.
No, we picked her up at the door.
But investigators didn't believe their story. Bloodstains found in the truck and on the shower curtain inside one of the suspect's apartments cast even more doubt.
Come on in here, you guys.
The police secured a warrant to collect DNA samples from Jason Desnoyers and Jesse Avalos.
This is Jason here. Just need some body standards.
Desnoyers appeared with his lawyer. A technician took hair, blood, and saliva samples. Detective David Cortez supervised the procedure. He looked for any signs that indicated Desnoyers had been in a struggle.
One of the things I did notice at the time was that he had a large cut on his right hand, which was in the healing process. It was scabbing over, but it was, you can tell that it was very recent.
It's not on the search warrant, no.
But just one
But
photo.
Desnoyers' lawyer refused to let police take photos of the cut.
We don't need a photo.
Body standards were also collected from Jesse Avalos. All of the samples were sent to the state crime lab to be compared to bloodstains found on both the jacket and shower curtain. Forensic scientist Mark Salvo conducted the examinations. First, Salvo extracted DNA from Carly's personal items to compare with samples found on the jacket. Then, he applied a chemical solution to the stains on Desnoyers' jacket.
Looks like there's some discoloration up here in this area. I'm going to do a presumptive test on it. In the presence of blood, I have a colorless solution. It's going to turn into a dark pinkish color if blood is present.
The jacket tested positive for human blood. Salvo also swabbed the shower curtain found in Jesse's apartment. Using the same method, he learned there was blood on both sides of the shower curtain. These were collected and marked for evidence. Salvo then compared the blood found on the jacket and the shower curtain and was startled by the findings. The blood on these items came from 3 separate individuals. he discovered that the DNA matched not only both suspects, but also the victim.
I think it's just unusual in a case like that where you can link 3 individuals to a piece of evidence. So I can show that either all 3 of these individuals were injured and bleeding and left their material on this item, or that some of the individuals carried away DNA and left it on that item.
Police still didn't know if Carly was dead or alive. And they believed the only people who did know were their 2 suspects. Since Jason Desnoyers had cooperated in the beginning, Detective Cortez hoped he would talk now.
When we attempted to contact Jason Desnoyers, I learned through his attorney as well as his family that his whereabouts were unknown. So we moved over to Jesse Avalos.
City Police, Jesse.
Cortez hoped with one suspect on the run, he'd get the other to talk.
All right, how are you?
Not wanting to tip his hand, the detective played it cool and just asked Jesse for his help in the case.
Yes.
And we explained to him that we wanted to talk about Carly and if he would help us out, give us any information that he had or that he knew. One of the things we explained to Jesse was how the family was feeling, not knowing the whereabouts of their daughter.
It looked like his tactic was beginning to pay off.
With that, Jesse, out of the blue, told us, well, let's get in the car. Let's go for a ride. The terrain around Las Cruces is so isolated that if a person wanted to hide something out there or someone out there, they could very easily do it.
Jesse Avalos took Detective Cortez to a remote location in the desert. Jesse pointed out a site where Desnoyers had burned incriminating items. What Cortez found in the ashes was chilling. There were remnants of clothing and accessories, metal zippers and rivets, eyeglasses, and a woman's lipstick and compact case. One item was particularly telling.
The main thing that caught our attention was keys, which did not burn. They were keys which we knew was Carly's dorm room number. About 2.5 miles. Advise task force, like if you can contact me.
Jesse told Detective Cortez that Jason killed Carly and burned her personal items in an attempt to destroy the evidence.
This is his first statement that he really ties Jason as far as getting Carly and killing her.
Jesse tried to retrace Jason's steps on the night Carly was killed, but it was dark and they weren't able to locate the young woman.
Contact me on my cell phone.
But even without a body, Detective Cortez knew they were close to breaking the case.
At least here we have Jesse talking to us, and at least we have a location to work with.
Detectives then had a difficult task. They called Carly's parents in to identify the items found at the burn site. Mr. and Mrs. Martinez confirmed the keys and the earrings were their daughters. And then Detective Cortez got an important call.
Get your hands up now! Now! Get them behind your head!
Hands up!
Step towards me!
Behind your head!
Step towards me!
Move away!
Keep walking! Lay down across the rail! Down! Get on the rail!
The early morning hours of March 17th, I get a call that Jason Desnoyers had been located just outside of San Diego, California. The deputy just happened to recognize Jason from one of the flyers of the mugshots, just by luck that we were able to locate and arrest Jason.
Jason Desnoyers was transported back to Las Cruces and formally booked for the murder of Carly Martinez.
All right, just come on in, going right to your left.
Once Jason was in custody, They then arrested Jesse Avalos on tampering with evidence. Investigators knew that without a body, it would be more difficult, but not impossible, to convict them of murder.
It's very important to find this body. Not only to the family, which was a big concern for us, because we still needed to prosecute these subjects.
Police led an extensive search around the burn site. Hundreds of search personnel were on hand to attempt to locate the remains. Given the vastness of the desert, authorities knew the search could take weeks. And through it all, Detective Cortez continued to pit one suspect against the other, convinced it was only a matter of time before one of them broke down.
We decided that we would meet up with Jesse and tell him, hey, we located Jason. He's putting the blame on you now, Jesse. But Jesse tells us, well, I'll tell you. I'll come up clean now and tell you where she is. And I'll take you straight to her body. We told Jesse, okay, here's your last and final chance.
It started as a grid search, and we'll coordinate with us, the 3 canines, how we want to do it. Keep your radio on where we can communicate with you.
Jesse Avalos again showed detectives several areas where he thought the body was located. Even with the help of university police, border patrol agents, and search dogs, they found nothing. So Detective Cortez came up with one more strategy.
On our way out, we made sure that Jesse did see Jason and that this was no bluff. All right, Jason, you're up. Good luck.
After seeing Jesse Avalos helping police, Jason Desnoyers now began accusing his friend of the murder. He claimed he could show police where Avalos had buried the body. Jason now led detectives to various locations, but Carly's body was not found. Frustrated, officials continued to search on their own. Finally, the rescue team made a gruesome discovery not far from the burn site.
We heard over our police radio that one of our civilian search and rescue horsemen had located what he believed was to be a body.
Cortez and his team of investigators quickly went to the scene. They confirmed that it was the body of a young female. After 67 days of investigation, police had finally found the missing college student.
When we got there, we knew it was Carly. Finally, we found her.
The body was exposed to the harsh desert elements for over 2 months and was badly decomposed. It was removed for autopsy. Police believed the forensic evidence gained at autopsy would not only reveal how she died, but also secure the conviction of her killers. The Las Cruces, New Mexico police had arrested Jason Desnoyers and Jesse Avalos in connection with the disappearance and murder of college freshman Carly Martinez. Over 2 months of investigation came to an end after police discovered Carly's body at a remote desert site. The body was transported to the coroner's office for autopsy. Medical investigator Patricia McFeely's first objective was to make a positive identification of the body. Dental records easily confirmed the victim was Carly Martinez. An initial assessment of the body revealed signs of sexual assault and 27 knife wounds.
Well, we were looking for the cause of death. In her, there were multiple areas of injury. She had stab wounds of the chest, and she had stab wounds of the head, and she had some blunt trauma also in the head area.
Dr. Vince Steffen, a specialist in skeletal biology and forensic anthropology, was asked to examine the wounds. He was asked to determine the type of weapon used.
At the time, the decedent had been out in the desert for a couple months, so she was in an advanced state of decomposition. So looking at the outer wounds on the skin may not necessarily have given a good indication of what actually happened in those areas.
McFeely and Steffen ordered x-rays of the wounds. They discovered a tiny piece of metal embedded in the skull. It proved to be the tip of a knife.
See the perforation?
Then they found evidence that another weapon was used.
Okay. Then there was a second pattern of trauma that was consistent with some other type of object. It left a clear impression that it was not made by a knife.
Steffen and McFeely speculated that the other instrument matched the pattern of a set of needle-nosed pliers. Two weapons could mean two attackers, and any one of the wounds could have caused Carly's death.
It would suggest that either two people were doing something, or one person had one instrument for some reason, put that one down and picked up another.
Investigators knew the second scenario was unlikely. With this analysis and the other evidence, police reconstructed how the murder took place. That evening, after skating, Desnoyers and Avalos took Carly out into the desert to continue their drinking, and then raped her.
Desert. We believe that when they got Carly with them in the truck, sitting in between them, they were in control. They figured they could have their way with her, which, consisted of raping her because of what they had done to her at that point, that they couldn't just let her go.
What are you doing?
They then killed her and left her body in a remote location, hoping she'd never be found.
Come here. What are you doing?
It was not the ending Detective Cortez had hoped for.
Here we had an 18-year-old college girl just starting her life away from home for the first time. And just saying, how this could happen to anyone's daughter, anyone's child.
Jesse Avalos was convicted of first-degree murder. He received a life sentence. Jason Desnoyers was also convicted and is currently serving a life sentence. Some killers prey on those they know, gaining their trust and making the crimes easier to commit. Others rely on the vulnerability of strangers in need. Virginia's highways offer scenic views of the surrounding countryside. But on the morning of January 23, 1995, along a remote stretch, a grisly discovery was made.
911, where's your emergency?
Shortly before dawn, 911 operators in Washington County received a call about a lifeless body near Interstate 81.
Central 835. Need you to respond to I-81 northbound, just before exit 10.
The responding officer found a half-dressed female lying in the middle of the road. The Washington County Crime Scene Unit processed the area. Crime techs photographed the site and canvassed for evidence.
More blood stains here.
Investigators were unable to identify the victim at the scene. They did not find a purse or any identification. Police also recovered a plastic grocery bag. It had been partially wrapped around the victim's head. More evidence was found close by. a pair of pants believed to be the victim's.
3 pieces of paper.
In the pocket was a slip of paper. On it was written 2 phone numbers, both out of state.
Gainesville on it, 304, I believe is Florida.
The pieces of evidence were bagged and sent to the state crime lab. Investigators also found another important piece of evidence. A set of bloody tire tracks. Detective Kenneth Wilson investigated the case.
There was some obvious tire tread marks that led from the lady's body out toward the northbound ramp of I-81 North and on down the ramp. It became obvious that the vehicle had run over the lady's legs.
Forensic technicians photographed the tracks. It was evident they were made by a very large truck. Detective Ross Sheets also worked the case.
Appeared to be the tracks left on the roadway when he ran over the victim's right leg, left marks that appeared to be that of a tractor and trailer. The diameter and the revolution of the tire led us to believe that in fact it was a tractor and trailer.
Pull back, and after a while it left.
Detectives canvassed the rural area to see if anyone had heard anything unusual. Police found one man who remembered hearing a truck around 3 a.m. He told police he heard the truck idling for several minutes. Then he heard it turn around and drive back onto the interstate. The man was a mechanic who worked on tractor trailers. He did not see the vehicle, but he was confident the engine was a Peterbilt motor. Thinking the trucker might still be in the area, police moved quickly. They advised way stations along the interstate that a possible murder suspect might be traveling northbound in a semi-truck with a Peterbilt motor.
We also notified the Virginia State Police, the West Virginia State Police, the Maryland State Police, and North Carolina State Police to also be on the lookout for any tractor and trailer that may have signs of blood or hair or human tissue on that vehicle.
At the way stations, attendants looked closely at each tractor trailer. The search turned up nothing unusual. The Washington County Coroner's Office conducted the autopsy of the body, officially noted as Jane Doe. The medical examiner determined the victim was between 40 and 50 years old. There were marks on her neck that indicated she was strangled. X-rays revealed the victim's neck was broken. The ME also suspected sexual assault, but no foreign DNA was recovered. The medical examiner concluded that due to the presence of insects and the level of decomposition, the victim had been dead for about 12 hours before she was left on the road. Forensic specialists took fingerprints and palm prints of the victim, hoping to identify her. Both sets of prints were run through several national databases. A match was located in Bloomington, Indiana. The victim was identified as 45-year-old Wanda Jean Turner. Police learned her prints were in the system due to a prior arrest on a trespassing charge. Authorities now needed to locate Wanda's family and notify them of her death. When they spoke to them, they also hoped to gather additional information about her background to aid the investigation.
She was known to hang out at various truck stops and would travel from various parts of the country just by means of riding with truckers.
But her family didn't give detectives much to go on. They had not seen or heard from her in months. With very little to guide them, investigators would have to trace Wanda's movements in the days and hours leading up to her death. They looked to the phone numbers found in her pocket. One of the numbers was a taxi cab company in Gainesville, Florida. Investigators contacted the Gainesville Police Department and asked for assistance. They hoped someone at the cab company would remember Wanda. Gainesville police showed photographs of Wanda to the cab drivers. One man recognized her. The cab driver told police he took her to the bus station around 11 a.m. on January 22nd. He remembered that she only carried a plastic grocery bag. But Wanda did not mention where she was headed.
We lost her trail then and everything went cold, but the last place we could place her alive was in Gainesville, Florida, getting on a bus.
Detective Sheets believed the victim's body was dumped in Virginia about 16 hours later. The investigation, expanded to 5 states, stretched the resources of the Washington County Sheriff's Office.
And we sent detectives out in different directions, going to every truck stop, basically from Roanoke, Virginia to Gainesville, Florida, distributing these posters and requesting any and all information.
They hoped someone had seen Wanda Turner with a truck driver. But no one remembered seeing her. And the case slowly grew cold. Then, less than a month after Wanda Turner's murder, a body of a woman was found off an interstate near Greensboro, North Carolina. The crime scenes were eerily similar. Once again, the victim was partially nude, and her body had been run over by a truck. If the same killer was responsible for both crimes, there could be more to come. Police knew they needed to work quickly before more women turned up dead. As Virginia detectives were piecing together the murder investigation of 45-year-old Wanda Jean Turner, another body was found in North Carolina. The newly discovered victim was found partially nude, abandoned near an interstate. Both crime scenes were similar, and investigators believed they were looking for one killer. The medical examiner determined this victim was strangled like the first. The victim's fingerprints were processed through the national database, and like the first victim, she too had a record for a minor offense. She was positively identified as Cindy Barkley from Georgia. Police tracked down Cindy's family. They said Cindy was living in Florida and didn't keep in constant contact. Although the last time she called, she said she was going to visit relatives in Maryland. That was about 2 months before. When she phoned, she was at a truck stop and said she was doing fine.
I'm gonna just be like, a couple weeks, and then I gotta go. I really, I gotta go.
13.
Since the phone calls home were so infrequent, no one reported her missing, and there were no more leads. Exactly 1 month later, in Kingsport, Tennessee, another woman was found dead off an interstate. She was discovered 30 miles from the first victim. To Detective Sheets, there was no doubt the murders were all related.
Crime scenes were similar. The girl seemed to be positioned on a roadway, and her clothes were pulled down.
The victim's prints were processed. She was identified as Tina Madsen. And like the previous 2 victims, Tina had been strangled.
Hey, get back. I came to catch you for a moment.
Police from 5 states organized a task force to compare evidence. By working together, they hoped to speed up the search, leading them to a suspect.
We have the address of the...
But so far, they had nothing.
We're going to go just as soon as we...
Although investigators believed the killer drove a truck with a Peterbilt engine, they had no idea who he was or how to find him.
Research the record.
Extremely difficult to identify a suspect in this case. There's a million or so truck drivers in this country and millions of trucks. And just like a long shot to find a suspect.
At the Virginia State Crime Lab in Roanoke, forensic scientists pored over the only physical evidence they had: a receipt, a piece of paper, and a plastic bag. Fingerprint specialist Andrew Johnson examined the evidence, but was unable to develop any prints on the receipt or piece of paper. He then looked at the plastic bag found wrapped around the victim's head.
Actually, a plastic bag is a surface very conducive for latent prints. It's rather slick, it's non-porous, and if the individual that touches it has perspiration or an oily substrate on their hand, will leave a very good latent print.
Johnson placed the bag in a sealed chamber. He then put cyanoacrylate, or superglue, in a small tin and set it inside a chamber to heat and release the vapors. The glue evaporates and adheres to the oily prints, which glow under an alternate light source. After 3 long months and just as many victims, Andrew Johnson made the discovery he believed would turn the case.
After photographing the latent print, I took the photograph and made a 5-time enlargement of the latent print. And then a tracing is done of the minutia on the latent print and transferred to a piece of acetate.
Investigators ran the prints through Virginia's fingerprint identification system. But to their surprise, the database didn't turn up anything.
Missouri, Alabama.
The fingerprints were their only link to the suspect. Police believed they were looking for a trucker, and now they needed to find another way to track him down.
Similar crime scenes have been observed.
Okay, we've developed a media release.
They made copies of the fingerprints taken from the plastic bag and submitted them to jurisdictions across the country.
People who can answer phone calls with this particular evidence we have. A lot of the...
And just when they were losing hope of ever finding the killer, their luck changed. Across the country, in Arkansas, investigators got a hit. A serial killer was on the loose. 3 murders were linked to the same perpetrator who traveled the interstates in search of unsuspecting women. The only clue connected to the crimes was a fingerprint found on a grocery bag. And after months of coming up empty, investigators finally got a match. The suspect had been arrested in Arkansas on a minor charge several years earlier. The print belonged to Sean Goebel of Asheboro, North Carolina. Investigator Sheets of the Washington County, Virginia Sheriff's Office was optimistic that he was their killer.
He was a tractor and trailer truck driver, so we thought we had our man.
Hey, Charlie, listen, I've got some things I got to take care of. I'll get back with
Detective
you later
Kenneth
today.
Wilson went to North Carolina and questioned the suspect's supervisor. Goebel was out on the road and was due back at any time. The supervisor confirmed that Goebel not only drove a tractor-trailer, he drove one with a Peterbilt engine. But Goebel's co-workers could not believe he was a cold-blooded killer.
Goebel was known throughout his department as a calm, easygoing, friendly, but somewhat lonely truck driver, but he had a good reputation.
Investigators obtained the trucker's travel logs to see if there was any correlation between the location of the bodies and the suspect's whereabouts.
We'll make copies. We determined that he was in the vicinity of a lot of murders that occurred across the country, especially the ones that we were looking at here locally.
When Goebel showed up, detectives were there to meet him.
Police, come here.
He did not seem surprised. There was very little reaction from him. But once we told him he was under arrest and the charge he was being arrested for, he was somewhat surprised.
Goebel denied any involvement in the murders.
Mr. Goebel, as we told you before,
He told police he never met any of the victims.
I don't think I've seen her before.
While Goebel was detained at the Winston-Salem Police Department, investigators processed his truck. Inside, they found a purse containing the driver's license of the last victim, Tina Madsen. They also collected numerous strands of hair. And they found what appeared to be blood. When detectives confronted Goebel with the evidence found in his truck and on the plastic bag, he admitted he had picked up the women, but claimed they were alive when he dropped them off. Police then obtained a search warrant for his home. Inside his bedroom closet, they made a gruesome discovery. Police found purses, women's shoes and underwear, and other personal items. Investigators believed Goebel was collecting souvenirs from each victim. With evidence mounting against him, Sean Goebel ultimately confessed to the 3 murders.
There was a plastic bag. He looked at us for just a moment or two, and he conceded that it was him. His reaction from then on out was somewhat subtle. He was very cooperative. His response was really, I'm glad this is over, but I'd like to just get it behind me and get back out on the road.
But Detective Wilson knew he wasn't going anywhere.
Okay, Mr. Goebel.
Goebel told police what happened the night he picked up Wanda Turner. Near Virginia, Wanda asked the trucker for a ride.
Want a party?
He said he agreed and killed her. Then he put the plastic bag over her head to keep the blood from getting on the seats. The confession gave investigators more than they needed to bring the killer to justice.
We started a crime scene with 3 pieces of paper and 2 telephone numbers in a plastic bag. Like a million in one shot trying to locate this individual.
His confessions allowed Goebel to avoid the death penalty. He received 3 consecutive life sentences. Killers can lure unwitting victims, blindly gaining their confidence and trust in order to commit murder. Yet forensics can reconstruct the details of their crimes and piece together the evidence needed to convict, exposing the perpetrator's lies and bringing them to justice.